There's no real indication from anything that I've seen so far that Mercedes are sabotaging Lewis.
They would have to be so precise with their sabotage, right? In that George gets pole, but then Lewis has to get no better than a second, right? Or be in the front row,
Correct.
but no worse than that, right? And then, I mean, I know Mercedes have been known to be a dominant team, but I don't imagine a world in which they could literally pinpoint exactly where he's going to fit in, given, oh, by the way, that the competition is so tight.
Mercedes were shocked and dismayed by the responses that they're getting um, this season to Lewis not being the chosen one. Uh, yeah, for Ferrari, I think are going to have another thing coming. Like honestly, Ferrari, Scuderia, brace yourselves. It's gonna be an absolute storm if Lewis isn't
Well,
on pole every race and winning every race and beating Charles in every session.
hello, and welcome to another edition of the Tired F1 Pod. We're back and we're more tired than ever. Shez, how's it going?
I
Good?
am tired.
Yeah, I agree. I am tired from many things. One, from having a miserable weekend as a Ferrari fan, but I can't believe I'm going to tell you this, and we are going to talk about it today. I'm starting to feel more and more tired just seeing the social media reaction in response to Lewis's result, which I would at first sort of think about this as probably one of the best results of the year, given how the year has gone for them. But evidently, people are upset in all kinds and forms, and our viewers have chimed in with all kinds of opinions. But I do see this sort of underlying thread that says or alleges that Mercedes are somehow sabotaging him, and I, for one, cannot understand and head or tail of that. So I kind of want to kick it to you first to see what do you think as the resident Mercedes fan.
I think the short answer to that, Ammar, is no. I have that there's no real indication from anything that I've seen so far that Mercedes are sabotaging Lewis. And I think by the end of the weekend, Lewis was kind of saying the same thing as well. Now, I mean, we can't be completely privy to everything that's happening within the four walls of Mercedes-Benz AMG F1, but all the evidence that we've got in front of us is that the difference between the drivers this weekend was down to the drivers really more than anything else. But we can certainly talk about the individual grievances that people have brought up because there were a bunch of things that people brought up in the comments of our last video um, as evidence that Mercedes were sabotaging Lewis.
Yeah, we can bring those up. I'd like to just sort of kick it off, but with the overall idea about what is being alleged here, right? A team is sabotaging one driver over the other to prove what? Because the guy who's being sabotaged is actually leaving. So I don't even understand that as a concept, and I'm a little bit confused. I mean, even if they were, I mean, okay, I mean, it's not like they're in the championship fight either. It's not. This is not like this is Red Bull, right? Like where there are two drivers maybe competing for a championship, and then okay, maybe they are giving George the advantage because he's the guy that's staying back.
Yeah, I mean, I think in general, any kind of news around Lewis Hamilton tends to evoke quite polarized opinions, because I think as with any champion, anyone that's within that GOAT debate, there's always people that absolutely love him. There are people that absolutely don't love him, and there's never really that many people, even if they say they don't care, that don't really care. Everyone will have an opinion. And when Lewis isn't doing well, it is unusual. Like for him to be beaten by a teammate in any discipline, whether it's qualifying or in races, isn't something that happens very often, right? So I think people look to find a reason for why that's happening, and the problem is that has then fed into, oh, it's not Lewis's fault. It's Mercedes. Mercedes
Yeah.
are doing it
Well,
to him, and that sort of manifested itself quite badly on social media. I mean, to the point where this week, the Mercedes AMG um, admin for the Formula One team were deleting accounts and blocking people that were egregious in their comments. But and I think that's right. On a base level, I just can't understand why any Formula One team would sabotage one of their cars.
Yeah,
Like, just from a pure performance point of view, it doesn't make any sense. Like, you're out there trying to get the best
sure.
constructors result that you possibly can. So to hobble one of your cars doesn't make any sense, does it? Like, to get a worse result for one of your cars, that will cost you money at the end of the season. That's money that you're going to use for developing your car. That's people's mortgages. That's people's holidays that
Yep.
you're putting on the line by sabotaging one of your drivers'
Well,
cars. Doesn't make
and
any
then
sense.
and then think about this. They would have to be so precise with their sabotage, right? In that George gets pole, but then Lewis has to get no better than a second, right? Or be in the front row,
Correct.
but no worse than that, right? And then, I mean, I know Mercedes have been known to be a dominant team, but I don't imagine a world in which they could literally pinpoint exactly where he's going to fit in, given, oh, by the way, that the competition is so tight. It's one thing if you're the dominant team, and like Red Bull has been for a while, right? And then everyone else is so far behind that you can even take these. They sound like a hideous sort of way of calculating this, but you can take those calculations, right, and still be okay. I just don't even understand how that works. And then also, of course, the fall or the difference between the two, it was pretty big. It wasn't. I mean, look, the margins are really tight in general, right? So that's what you get with the grid, but it's kind of ridiculous to kind of see that. So, and then I have to be honest with you, Shez. I have been a little bit down on the comments that Lewis has made throughout, and you and I have talked about this before, but he's been kind of adding fuel to this fire, right? Where he said, well, suddenly from practice to qualifying, the tires are a little bit colder, or like all of these things, or he's at least not putting it to bed. Now, in his defense, after the race, he came back and said, look, this was one of the worst races I've ran. And he took ownership of that and to some extent, quashed any of those sort of sabotagey kind of theories, but evidently not enough, right? And what do you think of that?
Yeah, but I don't think a driver is responsible for the feelings and the comments that their fan base make, right? But like, we have to somehow separate those two things out. That it's like saying that um parents or a teacher are responsible for the behavior of a child in their class. That it's not their responsibility. Lewis is entitled to have his own views, right? And he's embedded within that team. He is out there driving that car week in, week out. And he knows what he feels. He knows the relationships that he has within his team. So it's absolutely okay for him to say whatever he wants and whatever he feels. But he's got first-hand experience. Everybody else that's listening is doesn't have those, and they're extrapolating things from what he said without knowing what the ins and outs of the details are of that. Um, but they're intelligent people in the main. People that are making these comments, you'd expect are intelligent people that are able to rationalize and understand what someone's saying and to critically analyze what someone's saying. And maybe I'm giving people too much credit. Maybe I'm not. Um, but that's on them. For someone to make a comment on what somebody else has said is their responsibility. It's not Lewis's. Lewis is allowed to say what he wants, I think. And as you say, to his credit, he dialed all of that back after the race, didn't he? And said, "Look, this is on me. I did this." And as we said before, I think that is the mark of a champion, is to not back away from your shortcomings
Yeah.
or
Well,
where you can improve, and to actually face those up front and go, right, this is where I can improve, and then go out and find a way to do that.
yeah, and look, I mean, I think your point is fair, right? The only thing I'd sort of push back on is there is criticism and all kinds of candidness that probably should happen behind the scenes, not for all of our consumption, right? And there has been sort of this passive aggressive behavior from both sides, I would say, from Mercedes too, to a certain extent, and that's been played out in the media. And I think this is kind of, all signs are pointing to, right? Whenever you have these breakups, right? They're inevitably going to get a little bit more awkward with every passing day, with every passing race, with everything that's on the table, right? And I think it's again, this comes to a head now, largely because Mercedes seemed to be in the mix for a race win. And you could argue that George could have challenged Max for a win had he made, had he not made the mistakes he had towards the last few laps, right? And so, minus that, this is largely a moot point. But it does seem like the idea that Mercedes threw away a win has somehow been linked to Lewis being sabotaged, aka,
Sabotage, yeah.
yeah. So that kind of makes no sense to me. And
Exactly. I mean, Mercedes
um,
want a win one way or the other, right? So
exactly.
having Lewis on the front row of the grid would have made that easier. Well,
Yeah.
even if it isn't Lewis that wins the race, it would have made it easier. I mean, my personal opinion is that if Lewis had been on pole, genuinely, I think he would have probably won that race with the pace that Merc had. If he'd been on the front row, I think he would have won that race. With George, I knew that he would do what he did, which was to qualify it well, and then make mistakes in the race or not manage his tires, which he didn't
Well,
do as well as he could have done in the first stint.
I don't think
Those
this.
things are part and parcel of those two drivers.
Yeah.
And I mean, part of me is thinking that actually what Mercedes needed was an amalgam of both of those two drivers. They
Yeah.
needed
Yeah.
they needed someone that qualified as well as George did and someone that raced as well as Lewis did. That would have been the perfect amalgam. But the reasons that those drivers didn't win the race were down to them. Lewis didn't qualify well enough and George didn't race well enough. It's as simple as that to me.
And then the reality is his qualifying woes have shown up throughout the year. And frankly, throughout his career, he has not been a great qualifier. So I think that
Oh,
if
oh,
he's
let's
not been,
back up
well,
there, Nelly.
again, in the context of, listen, I'm not insulting Lewis Hamilton. Please don't come at me with that. I'm just saying we've always known him to be more of a Sunday driver as opposed to a Saturday driver. That's all I'm trying to say. It's all
Well,
contextual.
yeah. I
And
think we need to
again,
get
so
that straight.
yeah.
Lewis has still got 104 poles behind
Yeah,
him, and like
of course,
he definitely can
100%.
qualify a car.
There is no
All these
look.
things are
Yeah, I think we're at the point with Lewis Hamilton where you cannot, other than to give criticism of the now, right? There's no other criticism beyond that. Like he's past that, right? So I don't think this is nothing that I said is actually questioning his ability to qualify well. I'm just saying that relative to Saturdays between Sundays, he is more of a Sunday guy, right?
yes.
Which I've argued
I
that's where the
think
points have given up. That's all I was trying to say there.
yeah,
Major
and
correction.
yeah. Please don't hate us for that slip. But just very quickly that to specifically talk about some of the things that happened in Montreal. Um, we talked about this in our race review video pretty briefly, but we can go into it a little bit more now, the specifics of it. So one of the things that has been brought up was that Lewis's tires came out a couple of degrees colder from the tire blanket than George's. That's being used as a marker sabotaging him. They're putting him out on colder tires. James Allison has just done his the debrief, the Montreal debrief, as Mercedes do every race weekend. Um, and look, his answer is exactly right. The tires come out of the blankets at 70 degrees. Even that is too cold to be able to set a good lap time. Um, they still need to be warmed up more on the outlap. That is down to the driver to be able to get the tires into that window, but it's going to be much more difficult to do that on a cold track. It's like the track temperature dropped by I think 14 degrees between Q2 and Q3. So number one, just based on that, I think Mercedes were going to have an uphill struggle trying to get their tires into a window that was optimum for them. They were also miles quicker than everybody else in Q2. They were the only team that got into the 111s. So again, it was going to be tricky for them to get to that level again. I don't think they were going to get to that pace because the track temperature had dropped. But that couple of degrees is not the reason that Lewis didn't end up on the front row. But those small margins, that 0.28 of a second that we tried to explain in our post qualifying video, was the difference between him being on the front row and him being seventh. Tiny, tiny margins
Yeah,
have
it's
ended up
well,
with big consequences, haven't they?
we've gotten what we wanted, right? We've been complaining about everything being too one-sided, and we've gotten a packed field where, any of four teams can be fighting for pole in any given weekend now. So there you have it. The margins are really tight. Can I spin this forward a little bit? What do you think the rest of the season looks like? Because I'm going to assume for a quick second here that Mercedes will be in the mix for race wins. I think Barcelona will tell us if that's true or not, because Barcelona tends to be that type of track that really kind of shows out who's where in the pecking order. So maybe all of this falls flat. But let's just assume that Mercedes have a half decent chance of putting the car on pole every weekend and then perhaps chasing for a race win. Who should they peg their support behind for the rest of the year?
They won't. They won't do that. But like number one, like even if they're in the mix for regular race wins, I think by race 10, they're still trying to understand their car. Like I think we're almost halfway through the season. They've had one Grand Prix podium. Um, I can't see a realistic shot at either title particularly. So I can't see a reason to put their money behind one or other of their drivers. They just have to play each weekend as they see it, and each driver just has to do the absolute best that they can. In terms of how I see these two drivers performing over the rest of the year, I think George is going to continue to perform brilliantly in qualifying, but I think that Lewis will start to redress that imbalance between the two, because what what we see from Lewis generally is, number one, he gets better towards the end of a season. Like he definitely has a peak towards the end of the season. I think 2021 was an anomaly in that he started off all guns blazing, and that allowed us to have the championship battle that we had. Because if he'd started the way he normally starts a season, I don't think we would have had that, by his own admission. Um, but second, the car is now, if it does what we expect it to do in Barcelona, i.e., it has that wider operating window, that duvet is bigger, as we've talked about a couple of times now, then I think the car comes back towards Lewis, because Lewis tends to bring something extra when the car is able to. So there's a perceived maximum that a car can achieve, and I say perceived very pointedly, because I don't think there is no way you can get more than 100% out of a car. Physics don't work like that. But there's a perceived ceiling to what a car can do. And I think what Lewis can do when the car is absolutely brilliant is he can get an extra little bit out of that. So I'd expect to see some absolutely banzai, amazing. Where did that come from? Qualifying laps coming out of that car, a la Singapore 2018 or Austria in the wet 2020. I think I'd expect those laps to start coming out. And if either of those drivers can get the car into a position on the grid where it can do some damage, Lewis is incredible over a race distance. You know that if he can get the car on the front row or within the front two rows of a tightly packed grid, all bets are off. I think we've got a race win on our hands potentially. And all of the evidence that we have is that Merck have got it right, that there's a deeper understanding now of what their car needed, and where they've got to in Montreal isn't a sudden switch of a setup change or a track characteristic. This has gradually been building to the point where Monaco and Montreal as back-to-backs have shown that they have some latent pace within their car. I think Andrea Stella talked about this post-race, where he was saying that when you look at the onboards, they turn in their car, the front end goes where they want it to go. They didn't have that at the beginning of the season. At the beginning of the season, they had a car that was pointy, but the rear end just stepped out. Or later, they had a car that had a stable rear end, but the front didn't want to turn in. Now they've got all of that together, or certainly that's what it looked like in Montreal. And if they still have that in Barcelona, again, James Allison was very clear about this, that in Barcelona we'll have a clearer picture. But if that's what we see in Barcelona, and traditionally Merc are strong at Barcelona, even in the ground effect era, yeah, I think we're on, man. I think we're on.
So speaking of quotes, my favorite one coming off the weekend is Christian Horner taking James Allison to task, right? Where he talked about the Red Bull downgrade being better than Mercedes upgrade. And I guess time will tell if this will all work out or not. But I do want to ask you this. As a Ferrari fan, I'm a little bit afraid of what is coming my way next year. I generally I tend to like Charles, right? And I like Carlos this year, as you've labeled me at times. I've become Carlos Sainz's personal representative in our space, such that it is. But I'm generally agnostic when it comes to picking a driver since Kimi Räikkönen left. I want Ferrari to succeed, but am I going to have a lot of trouble when this kind of stuff happens next year?
Uh, in that the two drivers both being competitive.
Yeah, and the backlash that'll come from
Yeah.
whatever what is the
Yeah,
right way to describe
yeah,
the
yeah, yeah. I'm with you. I think that if if Mercedes were shocked and dismayed by the responses that they're getting um this season to Lewis not being the chosen one, yeah, for Ferrari, I think are going to have another thing coming. Like honestly, Ferrari, Scuderia, brace yourselves. It's gonna be an absolute storm if Lewis isn't
well,
on pole every race and winning every race and beating Charles in every session. The pattern that has built up around Sir Lewis Hamilton, and as I say, through no fault of his own, because I'm not gonna band a driver together with his fan base. They're two separate things. Everyone is responsible for their own responses. But the pattern seems to be that uh, Lewis's fans will not take kindly to Lewis not being number one, and that will be a rude awakening for Ferrari, who at the best of times don't handle criticism very well.
well, I was just for a second thinking if this was Charles and Lewis this particular weekend. I can't imagine the comments we'd be getting in my timeline in particular, right? Because Ferrari are even better at screwing up strategy on a weekend where they couldn't have done any worse, and they found a way to do that. And I can't
Ah,
imagine what that would look like, right? But there we have it. In 2025, we have Lewis Hamilton mania meeting the Tifosi. What could possibly go wrong? And on on that note, thanks for watching. Thanks for commenting. Please leave us a comment. Please subscribe. Please tell us how we're doing. We love reading your comments. We respond to as many as we can, and we read all of them. Thanks for watching.